Hi, this is Shane Davis. Welcome to the Vintage Car Club 2015 tour held in and around Kamloops, BC. In part 2, we continue our day with a trip in the 1912 Hudson 33 Speed Roadster owned by Fred Gray. Our destination is Harper's Trail Winery, where we shall have dinner. Fred has unloaded the Hudson and prepares to take it for its first major run on public roads in over 25 years. Our dinner destination is Harper's Trail Winery. Both Fred and I have dressed for the occasion. Let's enjoy this historical journey.
Is that second gear?
Now we're in third.
Okay.
But its second gear is kicking it up.
Upon our arrival at the winery, we are greeted by the usual suspects and enjoy the ambience of the warm sunshine, the natural landscaping, and of course the other vintage cars. Dinner dress is in the spirit of the notorious outlaw Billy Miner. I wonder if the living days of Billy Miner were this romantic. Whomever we are or pretend to be, we are welcome to sample the wine. Sit down for dinner and just enjoy the moment. Life does not get any better than this, unless, of course, you are Billy Miner or part of his gang. Following our delightful evening, we return to our hotel in preparation for a long day of driving tomorrow. This morning the highway is smooth, the scenery is special, and the weather could not be more pleasant.
I think the 12 is a little more show car or whatever.
Our arrival at Val Pringle's steam mill is the beginning of a historical display of old machinery, artifacts, buildings, plus tales of amazing human endeavor. The whole atmosphere is one of freedom and intrigue. With such a display at the mill, we must not forget to admire the old-time vehicles in which we arrived. Their stories are equally fascinating to the artifacts here at the mill site. At least for me they are. Typical display sheds for an old mill. They are filled with machinery and equipment once used so long ago. If you are looking to restore an old machine, it may be just a matter of finding a part in the right color. The diversity of parts seems endless. In case you missed the history of this Marion steam shovel, here is George Hoffman to relate it for you. George is also a member of our tour driving his Model T Ford. Let's listen.
Imaging of the Marion steam shovel. It has a history like you'll never believe. In 1933, there was an article in the Marion Company newspaper called The Groundhog about this shovel, and they said it was one of the most interesting stories of any shovel around the world. It was in 1931, and don't quote me on the figures because some of the figures there and mine don't agree, but I think it was in January of 1931, they unloaded it off the CN flat car in downtown Vanderhoof, and they walked it through the center of town, heading for Manson Creek in the Yamanika Mountains. The article says 160 miles. The article I have says 192 miles. And they walked it through the center of town, and across the Nechako River. Halfway they got stuck. They fell through the ice, but the water wasn't too deep. It didn't put the fire out, so they banged their way out, got it back out the next day. Then they put some logs under it and skidded it across, and they got it across the river, and then they started walking from there to Fort St. James. And today that's what, about 60K? And when they got to Fort St. James, they had to cross the river right at Fort St. James, and it was open in the wintertime. There was no ice. And it's a big river. It's like 700 or 800 feet wide and running really heavy, kind of like crossing the South Thompson. And they got halfway across the river, and they sunk out of sight, and she went below the fire and put the fire out, and there they were in the middle of the river, stuck. So the next day, they got a Cat 60, and now you got to think, this is 1931. The Cat 60 is the first one we were built in 1926, so we're talking about a pretty new cat. Hooked up some block and tackle, and in the article it said it was a 100-ton pull. They estimated to get it out of the river dead. They dragged it up until they could get a fire going and get it out of the river. And they started walking again. They shut down for the spring thaw north of Fort St. James for a couple of months, and then they continued on. But there was no road in those days, so they made their own trail. And in the end of the winter, the following winter, they got as high as 5,000 feet in the mountains, in the Yamanika Mountains, and they had to abandon the shovel. So it sat for the winter at a 5,000-foot elevation on this trail they were building. Now, when you think of it, they had to get water to keep the thing going. They had to cut firewood to keep it going, and they had to live as well. So these guys were a pair of tough characters. And there was all to go gold mining. Gold fever was on in the Yamanika Mountains. So they continued on the following year. It arrived at Manson Creek. It says on the article 18 months. In the other article I have, it says 22 months later. So it took them nearly 2 years to walk it through the bush and build their own trail. And when they got to Manson Creek, you'll see pictures of it using it for mining there. And I think in 1937 it shows them using it for loading the sluice box. Somewhere after that, they were working in a river and they got stuck in the bottom of the river. And when Bell pulled it out, there was in the blue clay and it was cordwood stuffed under the tracks where they tried to get it out. In the meantime, the river had flooded and buried it, and you'll see the pictures. It was just the top of the boom and smokestack and the top of the roof sticking out of the river. And so during the initial discussions, which was at Expo 86, Harry Burt had looked at 4 shovels up there. One was in captivity, 3 were in, this one was in the river, 2 were in the bush. He said, well, the one in the river is probably complete. That's the one you should maybe go digging for. So they dug it up and brought it out home. They had to take it out and put it in pieces and put it back together when they got it here. Brought it back and restored it. But can you imagine walking that thing through the bush, 190 miles, over 22 months? Hell of a feat. And there was no road. They just made their own trail. Eventually they built a road into there. But at that time it was just a goat trail of a road. But a lot of it, they made their own trail. They went over the mountains on their own, said to hell with it. But what a tough pair of characters. Can you imagine having to cut your own wood all the way and fetch water? In the summertime, I don't know where you get the water from.
What an awesome story. Many, many thanks, George. We all very much appreciate your commentary. Also on the mill site is a building displaying large-scale models of farm machinery, such as this excellent model of a traction engine made by Heartland Scale Models of New Norway, Alabama. Plus, there is a photograph showing the last of the camels on the Caribou Road. As with other museums and collections, there are far too many artifacts to see and enjoy. Of course, another visit or two would help. The grounds of Val Pringle's steam mill are very picturesque, whether it be the nearby flowers, the secluded forest, or the distant sweep of the valley. Before we leave the steam mill, there are many adjustments necessary to coax this Buick back into life. At least 3 or 4 men offer their services, or rather, advice. The problem is either in the engine compartment or perhaps underneath. But it could be both. Finally, the car springs to life and is ready to head east for lunch. Today's lunch stop is the Route 97 Diner. Here is the perfect atmosphere for a break. Salad and hamburgers are on the menu. Follow up with a choice of ice cream cones, and then explore the derelict vehicles from the mid-20th century. Combined with our own vehicles, we have the ultimate in vintage car experience. Our stomachs are full, our senses are sated, our chauffeurs are waiting. Time to head for Quilchena. As the cars leave the diner, take note as to how many of them have right-hand drive. Many of the early ones do. It is not long before we leave the paved roads and travel the 40 kilometers or 25 miles of gravel road. We must remember that the early 20th century roads were mostly gravel, so these vintage cars should have few problems. After leaving the heavily forested area, we experience open scenery. I discovered a variety of dandelion which I'd never seen before. Its diameter is at least double our coastal variety. Our journey seems very long due to the abnormally hot weather, but eventually we encounter paved road again and finally arrive at the grounds of the Quilchena Hotel. It too has a collection of vintage machinery and implements. Next, a visit to the famous saloon to quench our thirst. We note the 3 bullet holes in the bar. A cowboy was refused more drink and shot 3 holes through the panel, punching a hole in a barrel of liquor. After dressing up in our period costumes, we had an excellent smorgasbord dinner. Speeches followed with applause. A short trip downstairs revealed another exclusive dining area. As the story goes, Billy Miner was held here overnight, as it was the most secure place available. The famous outlaw Billy Miner was the focus of this tour. Throughout our journey, we passed by many spots where he had visited. Alex Forbes kept us informed as to how the Miner gang operated. Many thanks to Alex Forbes for his contributions. Come Thursday morning, Fred Gray and I, with the Hudson in tow, returned to Vancouver Island while others went on a 35-mile drive around Nicola Lake. For Fred Gray, this tour was a great success, both for him and for his Hudson Speed Roadster. Although it only ran on several short runs, it ran very well, apart from a few problems with the gears. Fred is delighted by his Hudson, as well as his participation in chasing Billy Miner.